Hi guys, here's an intro to your watercolor. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be using Anilinky watercolors going forwards by Koh-i-Noor. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. The reason I'm using these is because after tons and tons of trial and error, these are the most affordable watercolors I can find that will create the depth of color that you want in your watercolors. And I know as beginners, it can be quite daunting to invest as much as you need to invest in watercolors and watercolor paper to create effects. So this way, because the colors are really intense, because they're dye-based rather than pigment-based, we'll be able to use a variety of techniques on student-grade paper, which is also less expensive, and create really the same effects as you can get with a lot of the higher grade watercolors, but just for less money. Now, because these colors are so deep, we are going to want to test them out before using them. So I'm going to go down. When I refer to them, I'll usually refer to them how far down they are from the white on this side in some of the tutorials, just to be clear. But let's try these out first. So the first one on this side is ultramarine. So you might want to mark out a sheet just like I've done here. You can pause the video, write everything down if you want. Next is phthalo blue. Now phthalo blue is a warm blue. The next one down is purple. The next one down is brown. Then we have gray. Black. And moving back up, white. The next one down is yellow. Then this one, it's not red, it's orange. Next one down is red. The next one down is light green. And the next one down is dark green. Now let's go over some watercolor techniques. The first technique I want to show you is working wet on wet. So with a clean brush that you've dipped in water, wet down the paper. Not so that it's just soaking, but just so that it's damp. Then using any color you like, I'm going to use the dark green because I use it the least. I'm going to just add in that color. And as you can see, it blends with the paper that you've wet. With watercolors, the reason they're such an exciting medium to use is that this simple combination, water and color, can create an almost infinite variety of effects depending on how much water is on your paper, how much water is on your brush, and how much water both of them have. Next, we're going to do wet on dry, which is exactly the same, but just on dry paper. You'll notice here that the edges are much more sharply defined when we do wet on dry. The color is also darker because it's not blending. This means wet on dry is good for detail work when we're doing contours on dry paper. Contours being lines, essentially. Now for the next one, we're going to do glazing, and we're going to come back to this one, but for now, I'm just going to take some orange, dilute it here, and just do one wash of color, and we'll come back to this. We need for this to dry to create the glazing effect, so that's why. Next, we're going to do reserving. Now this is where we wet just one portion of the paper, so in this case, I'm going to do the shape of a circle, which is going to mean when we come in with our paint, it's only going to lead into the wet space that we've marked down. For the next one, I'm going to do a graduated wash. In this case, I'm going to use red. And that's where you want to mix your color together in the well first. Put down one layer of just pure red, and then with a completely clean brush, come in with a second layer and a third layer of just clean water. And you'll see that the paint begins to create a gradient down. Next, we're going to do a variegated wash, and that's where we use two colors together. So you want to use two colors that blend into one another. So for this, I'm going to use purple and red. So I'm going to mix up some purple in my well here, so adding color, then adding water. And in my well here, I'm going to add some more red and some more water. I'm going to start with one layer of the purple, then one layer of clear water, then one layer of the red. I'm just placing it right next to the brush and another. And as you can see, the colors blend together. A variegated wash is how these colors blend. You can create a variety of effects with this depending on whether you move your paper up or down. You can create interesting sort of effects there. Next, we're going to do dropping in, which is very much like wet on wet, and that's just where we're dropping in color. So let's use those same two colors, red and purple. For the next one, we're going to do a dry brush technique. For this, you will need a bristle brush, as well as a piece of scrap paper that you can test this out on. So you'll want to get just any sort of spare sheet of paper, mix up any sort of color that you want. I'll just use the purple since I have it. Then you're just dipping the very tip of the brush in, so just this, into the top of the water. Then you're just grazing it along the surface of your paper. You want to use the practice paper first, so that all you're seeing are the brush strokes. And this can be good for doing grasses, creating some textures like inside of buildings. You can create a lot of really cool effects with a dry brush. The next one is a resist or masking. Now this is where we use a different medium than paint in order to repel the water from reaching the page. You can do this with masking fluid, chalk, a wax candle, oil pastel, oil, salt. The possibilities are almost endless. So anything that repels water can work as a resist here. And you can really play around with that idea. I've put down some masking fluid and left it to dry. So I'm just going to paint over that. Hopefully it's not quite dry, but I'll show you the effect. I should be able to get at least some of this off of it. I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to take off the masking fluid. Often if you use something, and I'm not sure if this chalk will work, but I can show the resist effect, let's hope here. So I've put chalk down, and you'll see here how my paint, let me get this out of the glare. My paint's just bouncing off of the chalk. And now the next one, it seems really self-explanatory, but it's a good thing to notice. So you'll notice that your watercolor brushes, especially round brushes, there's often a tip. So either you'll have a tip on your round brush, or if you're using a flat brush, on the side. With watercolors, we don't want to put too many layers of paint down on the paper. So instead of painting like this is how you should absolutely not paint. It's terrible for your brushes, and it's not going to make anything get color any faster. You should instead be thoughtful about your brush strokes and how much you push down on your brush to create a full brush stroke. So it seems, frustrating at first, or maybe it's taking too much time, but moving slowly with your individual brush strokes, you'll actually cover more ground than if you go like this, which you absolutely should not do. So we're going to practice here doing thin and thick lines. So using any color for the thin lines, I'm just going to use the very tip of my brush and try to make as thin a mark as I can. And just play around with this, and play around with what happens when you add pressure while you're moving your brush around, because that's another thing that you'll be able to do. So create different forms depending on what pressure you add. Now for the next one, let's get a bit more color, and now we're going to do thick lines. So whatever brush you're using, see what the thickest mark you can make is. And then finally, spattering. So spattering, let's load up our brush with some blue. I'm gonna get some ultramarine. This you can either like flick your brush, it's not great for it, but like this. Kind of like if you've ever like flicked a toothbrush like this, you can do that to create a spattering effect. Or you can hold your brush out like this and with another brush, tap it to create that spattering effect. Paint all over my face. And finally, let's go back to glazing. So I've let this layer dry. Now I'm going to go over with yellow, and you'll see how you can see the color underneath and the color above with glazing. So glazing is a way that we can create layers where you can see the color under or over it. So here are just a few of the effects you can make with watercolors. Really, the possibilities are more or less endless with watercolors just because of the range of combinations. But just to note, one more thing that we'll be using in classes going forward is white gouache. So I'd recommend getting some white gouache, but to be completely honest with you, if you have white acrylic, you will be able to create some of these effects as well. One of the things that people often find surprising is that you don't have to use paints in isolation. You can create mixed media. And with water media, because basically it's pigment separated by different types of water-soluble binders, you can actually mix media together. So gouache and watercolors basically are a spectrum of paints. They're more or less the same thing. They just have different degrees of binder and whitening agents. So I hope this was helpful, and we'll move on to painting now.